As you might already know, Trump isn't doing that well in the polls at the moment. His approval ratings are slumping, especially when it comes to his handling of the economy, and Republicans fared poorly at last month's off-year elections. However, dig into the data a bit more, and things start to look even worse for Trump, largely because of quite how terribly he's doing with independents. So in this video, we're going to take another look at Trump's poll numbers, and explain why his slump with independents bodes ill for Republicans. Who is the most influential person in the world? Each year, we ask our audience to rank their 10 most influential people across politics, media, culture, and activism. And now it's time for you to have your say. Click the link in the description to cast your vote for the 2026 ranking. So, let's start with a quick recap of how Trump's approval ratings have changed over time. Broadly speaking, Trump's second term can be split into 3 chapters. In the first chapter, which runs from his inauguration in January until late April, Trump's approval rating fell quickly and constantly. According to Nate Silver's poll aggregator, during this time, Trump's net approval rating, i.e. the percentage of people who approve of him minus the percentage who disapprove, fell from a post-inauguration high of 11.7 to a low of negative 9.7 in late April. This decline was mostly driven by voters' perceptions of Trump's handling of the economy. When Trump was elected, there was pretty widespread optimism that his tax cuts and deregulation would be good for business, and most Americans had relatively fond memories of the economy in his first term, when inflation was lower than it was under Biden. However, during the first couple of months, and especially after Liberation Day, it became clear both that Trump's second term was going to be a bit more chaotic than his first, and that, despite what he promised during the campaign, Trump didn't have some magic quick fix for inflation. This was also when the markets were getting nervous, and both the stock market and dollar were plummeting, which was bad news for basically any American with savings. The second chapter, however, begins in late April, and runs really until late October. During this time, Trump's net approval ratings essentially stabilize, hovering between -5 and -10. This was in part because the US economy didn't collapse, as many people thought it would, and the stock market more than recovered. But it was also because voters' attention turned towards Trump's hardline immigration policies, which, while controversial and possibly illegal, were nonetheless more popular than his economic policies. However, in the past month and a half or so, and this is what we're calling the third chapter, Trump's approval ratings have suddenly slipped again, falling from a recent peak of -7.5 in mid-October to a low of -15 in mid-November, according to Nate Silver's aggregator. This seems to be essentially because voters are once again focused on the economy rather than immigration, hence all the talk about quote-unquote affordability at the moment, which Trump has since described as a Democrat hoax. Furthermore, while Trump has always had lower approval ratings when it comes to his handling of the economy compared to his handling of immigration, the gap has widened further in recent weeks, as voters have become even more critical of his economic policies. According to data compiled by G. Elliott Morris, for instance, Trump's net approval rating when it comes to the issue of inflation specifically has fallen from about -20 in late August to a new low of about -30 today. Anyway, since mid-November, Trump's approval rating has essentially hovered between -15 and -13, although we should say that the big-name pollsters generally have Trump a few points lower than this. The latest YouGov poll, for instance, puts Trump's net approval rating at -19, with 58% of respondents saying they disapprove and just 39% saying they approve, while the latest Gallup poll puts it at -24, with 60% of respondents saying they disapprove and just 36% saying that they approve. Now, this is all pretty bad news for Trump in and of itself, but these headline poll numbers might actually understate how dire Trump's electoral prospects have become. And that's because they disguise quite how badly Trump is currently doing with independents. For context, independents are American voters who don't identify as Democrat or Republican, and they make up roughly a quarter of the total electorate. While independents were actually quite supportive of Trump in the first term, both because they saw Trump as an anti-establishment politician rather than a capital R Republican, and because they were generally pretty positive about his handling of the economy, but independents don't seem to like Trump this time around. You can see this in the graph that YouGov published in mid-November. Trump's net approval with independents has fallen to -35 compared to -19 at the same point in his first term. Similarly, Gallup polling from late November found that Trump's approval rating had cratered with independents, going from about 50% at the start of his term to 25% today, with independents being particularly critical of Trump's handling of the federal budget, healthcare, and the situation in Ukraine. Finally, G. Elliott Morris's MRP model suggests that this decline has been broad-based, and that Trump is now underwater with independents in every state. Now, Trump's headline approval numbers have been buttressed by the fact that he's still very popular with Republicans. Again, you can see this from the YouGov polling, with Trump's net approval with Republicans currently sitting at positive 73, compared to positive 64 at the same point in his first term. This is a big electoral difference between Trump's first and second terms, though. Trump 1.0 was less popular with Republicans, but more popular with independents, while Trump 2.0 is super popular with Republicans, but less so with independents. Anyway, this is bad news for Trump for at least two reasons. First, from an electoral perspective, it's worse for a Republican candidate like Trump to poll badly amongst independents than Republicans. That's because even if Republicans tell pollsters that they disapprove of a Republican president, they'll usually still end up voting for the Republican candidate at the next national elections. Republican turnout might be a bit lower, but Republicans who disapprove of Trump are nonetheless unlikely to vote Democrat. Conversely, independents who say they disapprove of Trump are far more likely to actually vote Democrat at the ballot box. And as such, the independent vote usually decides the outcome of the election, given that they account for the middle third of the electorate. It's worth noting, for instance, that Biden was polling pretty terribly with independents at the end of his term, and the Democrats obviously ended up losing the presidency, Senate, and House. Similarly, Trump's miserable polling with independents at least partly explains why Republicans fared so badly at the off-year elections in November. Secondly, though, it's also a symptom of the fact that Trump's administration is more responsive to the wants of its base, which is why they're so popular with Republicans, than it is of the wider electorate, which is why they're so unpopular with everyone else. This isn't an unequivocally bad thing. There are electoral advantages to having a loyal and energetic base, but it carries electoral risks because the base can drag the party away from the median voter. Trump does have other strategies, though. Like other politicians, he's put increased focus on social media, although admittedly with his endless Twitter rants, maybe he was always ahead of the curve. We discuss that in the next issue of our magazine, Too Long, which features an opinion piece about the rise of the politician influencer. That issue of Too Long is now officially in stock too, with it focusing on the reshaping of the Middle East. In it, we run through each country in the region to discuss how they're rewriting the next chapter of their story. From Qatar's growing global influence, who could govern the new Gaza, if Iran could dash for a nuke, and how Lebanon can disarm Hezbollah. This is a region we know a lot of you are interested in, so this latest issue dives deep, with our real thoughts on the next era in this often troubled region. Not only that, we also have sections focusing on UK, EU and global news, including our full rundown of some of the biggest elections which happened around the world over the last year. There's also our interview with YouTube's Money and Macro on how to fix the EU economy, the rise of the politician influencer, and the new left emerging in the UK. And as a special Christmas deal, we're offering you some gifts if you subscribe to Too Long. For instance, new subscribers can get a set of TLDR keyrings for free, our assembly required desk calendar for just £2 more, our wall calendar or Brexit the colouring book for £3 more, or you can just get your first copy entirely free if you buy it alongside assembly required. Find all of those options by clicking the link in the description. Or, as always, skip all of that physical stuff by just picking up the digital edition today.